So I have some international experience of the marketing task that you guys are trying to do, and that frankly you do far, far better than most other marketing sectors do, and you probably don't get the credit you deserve. Okay? So let's try and have a romp through, if we can bring up the presentation, hopefully. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. As we've already heard, I go on and on and on. So one of the first things I did when I got on the stage was start a timer that will at some point go off. And rather than you having to have one of those gong show kind of hooks that come and kind of forces you off the stage, when the timer goes off, I promise, even if I haven't finished, I'll just stop talking. And you can feel the release and excitement that will come with that. I'm still, oh yes, wonderful, wonderful. So always like to try and have animated starts. Now, everyone, when you're given a topic to speak on, the first thing, in the same way that I'm reliably informed all PhD students do the moment they've agreed their dissertation topic and all the rest of it, is you probably change it for another title, which you think sounds better. So that's basically what I did, okay? And the reason why I recognize in an audience like this is a bit more complicated than that, is I've used the word praxeology to try and explain something to you. And while I peer out into the audience, does anyone here know what the word praxeology means? Who wants to expose their intellect and skill? Oh, actually, very impressive. I knew we were in a smart audience, and actually with lots of academics in the room, it was always going to be embarrassing that I shouldn't put a word like this in. But usually I put this word in because it basically makes you think I'm more intelligent than I actually am. Yeah? And the second reason for putting the word in, if none of you know what it means, is it makes you think I'm more intelligent than you are. Yeah, because I know a word that you don't, and therefore, by definition, I must be intelligent. And that's the truth of a lot of academic teaching, and I apologize for exposing that to an august group like this, yeah? But that's the reality of what's going on. And what we're trying to deal with here, what we're trying to deal with as marketeers, is how do people really make decisions? And the truth is, a lot of folksy stuff your mum taught you is probably more accurate than a lot of the stuff in a lot of marketing textbooks. And we'll try and deal with that bit by bit as we kind of go through it. So let's start with the beginning of human behavior, and take a look at some monkeys. So this is some work by a guy called Frans de Waal. There should be sound in the background. But basically, the monkey has to give you a rock, hands over the rock, and in return, the monkey on the right is getting a grape, and you'll notice the monkey on the left is getting cucumber. I did got a monkey. I didn't cut his head off, though. Now, you can do this experiment with two monkeys side by side. You give them both grapes, they keep giving you the rock. You give them both cucumber, they keep giving you the rock. You give one of them grapes and the other one cucumber, which is seen as not as valuable, and you get this kind of reaction, okay? And the reason why this matters and is really relevant to the audience that we're talking about today is I'm the father of 4 teenage children. And I can promise you that for the next 20 years of their life, they will remember the time that you gave one of them something and not the other one something. And that bitterness and deep emotional response will sustain them for pretty much the rest of their life. I'm already 52. I'm hoping that, by the time I'm 65, they might have forgotten some of these incidents, but I'm pretty sure they're not gonna. Okay? And that's the reality of what happens. And actually, for those of you who flew here, it was quite funny. So I fly everywhere in coach. And one of the interesting things about it in our company, we have quite a strict policy on it. The curtain is there for a reason. The curtain is there to stop riots happening on long-haul international planes. So that when you're given that funny little meal and the guy next to you is having filet mignon with a nice champagne, he's not sitting approximately 2 feet 6 inches from where you are, kind of, demanding more. That's what the curtain's for. It's there to protect you. And that kind of behavior is an emotional response that drives pretty much everything we do, okay? Now, the second one, weirdly, that most research ignores is how we basically copy other people, okay? And that's best expressed by a bit of 1950s.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat
Actually, it's okay. Don't worry. I mean, this goes on for a bit longer than I'm going to show you. But trust me, they try it where the best thing about it is he's trying to look like he isn't turning around whilst actually copying everyone around it. And they try it with hats on and hats off and coats on and coats off. And basically in every situation, what I have already realized in this audience, and I'm eternally grateful to those of you who are laughing, you're making the people next to you laugh. And without you, I'd be dead. So I really appreciate that you're kind of keeping going. But that's the reality of what happens. Okay? So we'll just skip that, and we'll now go to a sport that I know is not actually super popular here in Canada, but you still play some. And I'll just show you something, even if you don't know the rules and don't care. Now, I'm British. I have next to no idea what's going on. I'm reliably informed that the 300-pound guys at the front are supposed to go hut, 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 and all run into one another, and this is not supposed to happen. I also actually am very lucky. I spoke at a conference with the market research director of the NFL about 6 months ago, and he reliably informed me that this is technically an illegal snap and shouldn't have been allowed. But it sure as hell didn't matter at high school in Texas or wherever it was that this happened. This is clearly a touchdown. And all I can promise you is that the people who've been tricked, and let's be fair, we know they've been tricked, because this is about context. You have an expectation of what's going to happen. When that thing doesn't happen, you can keep going for quite a while until people realize that something's gone wrong. But by God, for the rest of their lives, these people will not fall for this trick play. You basically get one go. You might get a second go if you're really lucky and you're patient enough. But you can't run this kind of thing all the time. And that's a bit like, actually, the convention of what's happening now. You're expecting I will come up here, hopefully say something mildly entertaining for kind of 40 minutes or something, and then shut up and go. And the reality is, if I started to undress now, even though Marion is now looking quite alarmed, I could get quite a long way before anyone would rush me on the stage and kind of prevent me, because there's a kind of convention of what's going on here that you're expecting. And don't worry, I've buttoned up already. It's okay. There's no trauma that you're going to experience here. We've already discussed cutting the heads off monkeys. So by comparison, me being naked is going to be the least of your problems. Okay, so let's kind of keep going with the context. What am I really saying is we make thousands and thousands of decisions every single day, and they're really dealt with through three lenses. And those three lenses represented a little bit by the videos. The first one, feeling. How we feel pretty much drives every decision that we make. Yeah? And in fact, all the brain science shows that if we stop being able to feel, we actually stop being able to make decisions. Yeah? It's very complex. We don't always understand how most of these things work, but we're pretty sure there's a vital link there. The second one's copying. The best heuristic we have as a society for learning is copying. And actually, weirdly, if you look at what's happening, it's very interesting in society at the moment. So we must be doing some of these things quite well, because we've gone from 2 billion people on the planet in 1950 to more than 7 billion people on the planet now. So we're an example of a species success story. Yeah? What's interesting about it is, of the 5 billion more people, 5 billion live in cities. Yeah, that's the reality. The growth we're showing is actually, and we're in one now, you know, in Quebec, but cities is where all the growth of humanity is coming. There is no one who is being born into the world to live in remote, rural, you know, places. There may be the odd person, we can all remember of one, who's leaving the city in their retirement to go and think that that's a much better thing to do. But if you look at, you know, the propensity of what's happening in society, and why do they live in cities? Because it's the best place for your labor to go a long way. So there's the joys of comparative advantage that, again, I'm sure the smart person who knew what praxeology is can probably explain that to you much better than I can. And the second bit is we're copying. Just copying off other people, because that's where it happens. Yeah? Out in the sticks on your own, you're having to work out how to whittle wood, how to make a knife. Fortunately, in the city, it would appear that these skills are not the primary function, and so we can develop much more exciting skills instead. Yeah, like, you know, being able to speak at conferences, that kind of nonsense. Yeah, so that's the reality, and framing is very important. And one of the things you learn when you talk to people a lot is that actually sometimes you have to find different ways of remembering the same thing, different ways of teaching the same thing in order for people to remember it. And it's the number of different ways that will give you more and more people understanding, rather than just saying the same thing again and again and again. And I'm again indebted to my 4 children for teaching me this fact, that actually they don't all learn math the same way, and they certainly don't learn math the way that I learned math, and they find it quite hysterical when I try to explain to them how I think particular problems should be solved. There's all sorts of new exciting things that didn't exist when I was a kid, like number lines. What is that? I really don't get it, so apologies. Anyway. So the truth is, when we try and translate this into marketing, what actually matters? And I'm indebted, this is a client of ours in the parking industry, and what they really wanted to do was get more people to pay on their cards. Pay on credit cards or debit cards, they didn't really mind. They just wanted more people to pay for their parking, not using cash, and by using the machine. That was really what they wanted to do. And we tried all the classic obvious things. We mailed people, we enrolled them in programs, we gave them more loyalty points, we even gave them money, we even stood people at the parking garages as they came in and told them about the ability to pay by card. We told them on the way out as they left, and we had someone by the card. And what was the single biggest and most successful intervention that we developed after a year of trying, I kid you not, was this. Okay, now it's sad and embarrassing to reveal that the smart minds in our company basically came up with putting a yellow line around it, and this was the best intervention because single-handedly it doubled the number of card transactions. Okay, it was way better than anything else we tried. And sometimes I think in your industry and all across marketing, we basically underestimate simple stuff that works in favor of stuff that either makes us sound smarter or seems like it was harder or involves, epic quantities of effort to kind of make them go. Okay? And this was another wonderful example. I apologize. So this is female contraception. If I start having a look at this, there was a joke a long time ago. It must have been invented by a man because it was a tablet you had to take for 21 days, stop taking for 7 days, start taking again, and if you missed any of the days, the prophylactic effect of the tablet was severely reduced in its efficacy. Okay? Now, that sounds like the dumbest thing you've ever heard. If you want to work with people's human behavior, you basically give them a tablet that you take every day. Okay? Now, that's what most of them happen. So most female contraceptive pills, apologies, I don't take them, but I'm reliably informed they come in a thing and you take one every day, and all they did was make the other 7 sugar pills. And then you just kind of keep taking them. And this was a very interesting intervention in Africa where they had a large problem with female anemia, and all they did was replace the 7 sugar pills with 7 iron pills and dramatically reduce anemia amongst women. This particular example was in Kenya, but I know it's been done in quite a few other African countries now. Now, what's interesting about this for me, is it's working with the grain of human behavior. Indeed, we have a lot of problems, for example, antibiotic resistance, and Rory Sutherland, who we work with sometimes, a kind of good friend of System1 group, sorry, even I have to System2 think about it for a minute, but the reality of what happens when you work with him is he thinks that what you should be doing is giving all antibiotics in a course, and you say, take all the white pills and then the 4 blue pills, and most people would complete the course of antibiotics, and we wouldn't have the development of antibiotic resistance. And I think sometimes in governments there's lots of opportunities to try and experiment with some of these things, because by God, they're probably going to work better than the way they do now. In fact, on antibiotic resistance, just because I was working with someone in the UK government on a similar scheme just a moment ago, they've been very successful in the last 2 years in significantly reducing the prescription of antibiotics simply by writing a letter to all the doctors in the top 10% of antibiotic prescribers and just telling them that they're in the top 10% of antibiotic subscribers, and their prescriptions reduced by about 70%, and I think it saves us £16 million a month in the UK just from those doctors' reduced prescriptions. So it's things like that. It's just trying to kind of understand what is the outcome that you want, what is it people are doing that you want them to do. And again, I think in your industry, most people think that's pretty obvious. We want more people to come and we want them to come more often. So how do we do this in statistical terms? Now, again, I'm not going to ask you, you've already proved you were smart, but the reality is, which one of these is worth more? 50% off, 50% extra free, and the truth in the maths, I won't embarrass anyone, I did do this in front of 600 maths students once, and it was quite impressive. The truth is, the word free acts on us like a kind of bizarre kind of catnip. We're almost powerless in the face of its immense efficacy, so much so that in plenty of countries, whether it's Belgium or Germany or something, they have laws about, how you can use the word free and when you're allowed to use it and in what circumstances, and it really matters. But the truth is 50% off is a better deal than 50% extra free. But actually, if you reverse that situation, this was a great academic study done, and you make it 35% off and 50% extra free, which near as damn it are the same thing on a pence per mil comparison. If we wandered along the aisles of supermarkets in life doing pence per mil comparisons, then you would expect a 50-50 outcome. But actually, if you do it like this, the truth is 50 is a bigger number than 35. Yeah, full stop, end of story. That is the maths that we're good at. And anything outside that is probably a bit of an effort, and I'm probably not going to bother. Even weirdly, for really valuable and expensive things, it happens all the time. Indeed, I spoke once at a conference of 6,000 accountants, and I spoke to them about branding and brand value. I had tons of very hard work charts looking at the performance of the FTSE and the S&P and so on over like 30 years, and lots of analysis and so on. In the end, I asked them 3 simple questions. I asked them how many of them knew how to do investment appraisal. So it's what accountants do for a living. 6,000 accountants stuck their hand in the air. We were pretty good at this point. I asked them how many of them owned a car. And again, 6,000 accountants stuck their hand in the air. And I then asked them how many of them did an investment appraisal on that vehicle before they bought it. Likely to be the second most expensive thing they ever buy after their house. Yeah? And 6 of the saddest people you've ever seen in your life sat in the front row where they'd probably been since high school. They'd kind of like done it. And the reality was everyone else had basically employed that very scientific and effective choosing technique of going into the car showroom and going, I want that one, maybe in red. That's the reality of what's going on. And these are the people who even had the skills to do the analysis versus the people who aren't. So there's a kind of context about here, which is most people aren't really doing the maths. So we have lots of mental shortcuts we use, and the truth is we think a lot less than we like to think we think. And those mental shortcuts are controlled to a degree, and I'm indebted to all the brilliant work done by people like Daniel Kahneman and so on, by a kind of lazy policeman who sometimes can be roused from his slumbers to come and kind of check whether what you're going to do is either going to kill you or leave you worse off, in some way. That's the reality of what goes on in most of our decision-making processes. So we're trying to understand. There are lots of great books popularizing the behavioral sciences, and we're trying to say, well, if that's true, how would I apply that to marketing? What truths are self-evident? What can I find out in the kind of facts that would help with this? So I'll just give you 5 quick ones. So the first one, as we said, we think a lot less than we like to think we think, and we basically make very fast, quick decisions. And then we sometimes use our system 2 to kind of rationalize those to make them seem sensible. And there's lots of great academic work that supports this. A perfectly good example sometimes actually with things like cars. The moment you've bought a car of a particular brand and make, you suddenly spot all the other ones like the one that you've just bought. But up until then, your ability to guess how many of the other one is available is almost non-existent. We're terrible at guessing some of these things, the prevalence, the frequency of certain kind of things. We're pretty bad. And I think that's the reality of what we're saying. It's really not a considered, conscious, thoughtful process. That's not what people are doing in the aisles of the supermarket of life. Yeah? The second one is stories. Stories trump everything. In fact, that's one of the things you guys do to your colleagues, to your partners, to your industry colleagues. It's the story of how well, Quebec did, or how well some other, Dubai, for God's sake. I mean, I first went to Dubai in 1989 as a newly minted brand manager in Unilever. And apologies to anyone from the UAE or in that part of the world. But, godforsaken bit of desert in the middle of nowhere. And now it seems to be this epic, airport hub. But not only is it an epic airport hub, it seems to be this cool holiday destination that certainly in Europe, everyone kind of goes to for a few days of fun and sun, the kind of Vegas. Now, if you told me that you could build Vegas, well, I mean, Vegas was built in the desert. That's the whole point, yeah? There's a kind of context about this, that someone had a vision, started doing things, and that's the outcome of where it kind of came to. So it's really about the story that you're trying to tell that works. The third one, and I apologize for this, but this is the harshest truth of modern marketing. We're all slightly obsessed with loyalty. And there are loyalty programs, and there are probably 50 people on stages around the world as we speak now, talking about the customer experience industry and the value of loyalty and all the rest of it. But the harsh reality in a lot of this is that most customers in every single industry mostly buy other things and sometimes buy you. That's the maths. And everyone, including us, so apologies, about 7.5, 8 years ago when I first arrived at Brain Juicer, as it was then called, I had this brilliant brainwave of what if, instead of our growth strategy being focused on trying to get more customers, what we did was we just took our 5 largest customers and doubled them in size instead. Wouldn't we all be wealthy, and wouldn't everything be perfect? And there began pretty much the crappiest year in Brain Juicer's history, because it's very, very hard to do that. And weirdly, there's a graph and a curve and a power law that pretty much controls how that doesn't happen. Yeah? You can't always identify this group of people and say, oh, we'll just double with them, and we won't worry. What you really got to do is keep growing. Keep growing with everybody as much as you can, and that's how it works. And that's what we, by and large, tended to learn. And when there are fits and starts in that growth, and trust me, no one has a nice straight growth line, that's really what you're then trying to work out. The problem you're almost always trying to solve is penetration. And the problem you're very rarely able to solve differently from the nature of your industry is loyalty. Yeah? Now, sometimes in the margins, there's money to be made in small amounts, but the truth is the curve looks pretty much the same for everyone. The next one, new buyers. This is, again, the same point, really about penetration. You can't increase your brand's market share by just targeting existing users. That's the same kind of point in large. And again, what have we derived out of all of our learning over a number of years working with clients? It's about 3 things. We've tried to make them a heuristic that's easy for us to remember, so that when we stand up and speak, we don't forget what we're talking about. And the reality is, it's fame, feeling, and fluency. And we'll try and explain those in a bit more detail as we come through now. So, what drives brand growth and how do we measure it? And this is true in the brands that you're dealing with, whether they're kind of destination brands or country brands or whatever they are. We make quick, intuitive, emotional decisions. We don't tend to weigh up many options. When we have options, we tend to choose on autopilot between a small selection. 3 to 7 seems to be optimal. So what are we really saying? You need a long-term focus on these 3 things. So the first one's fame. If a brand comes easily to mind, it must be a good choice. That's what you're battling with. And in fact, there was a great chart in one of the decks where that kind of spontaneous fame is really what matters. Prompted, don't care about prompted recall once you're kind of telling people. It's just spontaneous. If you wanted to go on a city break this week, if you wanted to go on a long-term holiday with your family, if you wanted to go, whatever the choices are, whatever comes first to mind is pretty much going to be a perfect reflection of current brand share in those markets. Yeah? And we see it time and time and time again across all the categories that we do research in. Yeah? Second one's having a think about how you might portray that. I thought with this audience, embarrassingly, this is going to go horribly wrong, but we'll just try it very quickly. So the first bit, which is the biggest city, London or Lima? San Diego or San Antonio? Tokyo or Istanbul? Bangkok or Bangalore? Now, the reality is most audiences tend to go for the 4 on the left. You're a bit smarter than the average. So most audiences tend to go for the 4 on the left, and it's actually the 4 on the right. And if you do a fame index, this is where you can cheat. Yeah? The reality is the four on the left are undoubtedly more famous, but they're not actually bigger in terms of population. But in terms of international visitors, I'm pretty damn sure that they win by a country mile. Yeah? And that's the reality of what's going on in these kind of like markets. Yeah? You're trying to win a popularity contest or a fame contest you may not even know you're in. Yeah? That's the reality of the game you're playing. The second one's feeling. So if I feel good about a brand, it must be a good choice. Yeah? We said our feelings drive our choices, so let's have a think about how that works in reality. So we'll just show you a couple of things. Apologies, I wasn't going to get political. But it doesn't matter, actually, what you feel, whichever side of the red-blue divide you happen to sit on. The reality is we have some perceptions, yeah? And we have a strong kind of visceral emotional reaction. And there was a favored brand for a long time, VW, and then suddenly there's a bit of a scandal about, you know, ooh, are they cheating? Cheating here in the US, we're going to pay billions of dollars in fines, cheating in other countries as well, trying to, you know, have a mechanism that defeats how they're measuring emissions. Now, the truth is with all of those, they had some perceptions before whatever it was happened, you know, and they have some perceptions after, whether that's, you know, in VW's case, bit of a corporate scandal. We still don't know how much of a scandal we're going to have with Donald, but what we do know is he's president of the United States. So even though we think about that in terms of kind of feeling, it was very interesting very early on when we were looking at some of this stuff, how strong some of those feelings were. I'll talk to you about it more in the context of fluency. And then the last one is speed of recognition. If I recognize it quickly, it must be a good choice. And that's a bit like trying to find members of your family in a football stadium or something. You know, if I put the 5, 6, 7 members of your family in front of, you know, 40,000 other people, and you're trying to kind of scan and find them, you know, you will have been doing that when you came into this room to see people you already knew from last year's conference or the year before, or your fellow board members. We are pattern recognition machines, the like of which, you know, even the best computing in the world hasn't even got close. There's a fantastic game, actually, Microsoft run, trying to get computers and AI to recognize all sorts of things. And all I can say is it's terrifying how we get so excited about certain aspects of AI, and a 4-year-old child would beat them by a mile. Yeah? And we're all going, whoa! You know, it just about recognized a baseball bat from a stick or something. And, you know, every child you ever meet everywhere in the world can do that without, you know, worrying about it from that kind of like age. Yeah? And so we have to get careful sometimes that we're getting very excited about certain things that are still pretty rubbish compared to how good we are. And actually one of those, when we talk about feeling, is in recognizing emotion. So everyone's very excited, facial recognition, trust me, I've tried pretty much every version of them out there, and they're mostly pretty terrible. They're good at smiles. If you smile, most facial recognition systems are pretty good. Any other kind of emotion, pretty terrible. Yeah? Actively bad, I would argue, in most situations, and dangerous to misread quite that badly. You would be classed as, I think someone just did it on one of those autism test scales, and every bit of facial recognition technology is in the severely autistic end of the spectrum. So, you know, it's just to give you a sense of, you know, it's hard to do this. 50,000 years of evolutionary biology has made us quite good at it. Yeah? And we might have to wait a few years while the computers catch up. So it's really about recognizing a brand quickly, and what are the tools that people recognize quickly? Very relevant to the discussion. Okay, so we'll just play a quick game. Guess the brand. That sounded almost Italian. I'm hoping that was someone from Italy. And Starbucks. I'm not even showing you the brand. Yeah, I'm just picking stuff out of their logos, and you all recognize it, very trained, nice kind of like audience. That's the reality. And the truth with these kind of games, it's a bit like recognizing your partner, okay? So I could be upside down, covered in shampoo, and my wife would recognize me. from strange angles, in strange positions. That's the reality. That's what happens. We get very good at this pattern recognition for things we see frequently and often. We're just not as good with people we just met. So, you know, I'm going to do a very good job today because unless Marion changes her dress, I will definitely recognize her the next time I speak to her. But if suddenly you whisked her outside and changed something about her, I might embarrassingly, even though we met, you know, half an hour ago, have to admit, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I don't know who you are. It's that kind of thing, and that's why you wear badges. That's why the badges have big names on. This kind of stuff really matters. It's trying to make a pattern, and then once you've seen them 2, 3, 4 times, we're all pretty good at remembering it thereafter. Yeah, most of us, sometimes. Okay, so these are distinctive assets, whether it's the M's, the colors, the little box they put your Happy Meal in. There's some stuff for Stella Artois on the bottom that works quite well. We've done lots of kind of tests on these things. You're trying to understand what is it about you that people recognize. And I'm terribly sorry to say this because Quebec's a lovely city and I've been here for the first time. But when you asked me before I came what I knew about Quebec, even after the brilliant presentation on the history, I would have, you know, flunked. I was a class F. You know, no idea, literally no idea. That it was in Canada, tick. That it was in the French-speaking part of Canada, tick. That it probably was very nice and had a lovely old town or something and was on a river, tick. Pretty much everything else, I'm terribly sorry, no idea. Yeah? And that's the game you're playing. You're trying to make it so that some of the things in my head are, whether it's a weird piece of sculpture or some of the amazing art you have around your city, or, you know, the museum or whatever it is, you know, those are the things that happen. And weirdly, when I look at what happens in yours, it's actually about the same pattern recognition. Why is it London's always showing Tower Bridge, even though, frankly, most people who go in London never go across Tower Bridge, never go to Tower Bridge, have never visited Tower Bridge, have never been to there. But we all know it's in the city, and it's one of the things that tells you which city you're in. Yeah, Red London buses, whatever these kind of things are, they're the distinctive assets that remind people, even if, again, lots of tourists don't go on a bus. Trust me, it's too hard to find a way around London on a bus if you don't know where you're going and you don't speak the language very well. Then trust me, you're going to go and see some interesting bits of London you really weren't expecting to see, because trying to work out even which direction it's going in, we like to make as hard and complex as possible for you to understand in order to separate the sheep from the goats. That's the reality of what happens in most cities. Yeah. So you even get lots of examples in a branding sense of people cheating. I apologize for outing large supermarkets, but in the UK this definitely happens. So McVitie's is the biscuit brand who invented the ginger nut. Apologies if you've not come across a ginger nut. Your life is the poorer for it. I recommend you come to the UK immediately and try one. It's a fantastic biscuit. Even maintains its integrity when it's dunked in your tea. Vital in the UK kind of society. But the reality is they just rip it off and make something that looks exactly the same. And it does pretty well. And if one of them's £1.12 or something at the bottom and it's 69p for the one at the top, then I'm afraid people who are wandering through a supermarket trying to make a selection from somewhere between 5 and 50,000 items where they're trying to choose maybe 50 to 70 items in less than 30 minutes, they don't really care. They're just, you know, picking whichever one looks like the one that they thought they were going to have. And the only people who are spending ages looking at it usually is like, if my wife has told me to get something and I'm not sure I'm getting the right one, then I'm a good 10 minutes in front of that fixture trying to work out, is that the one we have in our bathroom? Is it that purple? I'm pretty sure it's that purple. Because for me, the emotional cost and consequence of coming home with the wrong one is kind of like proving I don't love her. And that goes down really poorly. So I'm really going to invest in that extra effort. And this is another great British icon, Pimm's. You make Pimm's in large jugs with lots of lemonade, and it tastes like you're not drinking alcohol. And after about a jug and a half, you lose the power of speech. And you cease to be quite as entertaining as you thought you were when you'd had half a jug. So that's the kind of context of what happens with Pimm's. So what really mattered in the fame context, and I wanted to show this in Fluency because it was very relevant, was who was the third most recognizable person in the US election. And this was in January, before Donald had, it was about 2 days before Donald declared that he was even going to run. And who came third in our recognition contest? Yeah, I mean, sorry, I don't want to be unfair to poor old Marco Rubio, but you know, I think even his mum probably was struggling to work out. Oh, it's a picture of Marco, but you know, he wasn't getting good kind of recognition amongst the wider U.S. public, even in a bit where this is all about the election and you're trying to guess the candidates and you can barely work out who's who. And what was interesting about who came third was just Donald's quiff. Yeah. Will comfortably beat all the other candidates. And that's, again, what I mean by distinctive assets. Okay? You can laugh about it as much as you like. You can worry about how much product is required to create that particular kind of like hairdo. But the truth is, it's part of him. It's what helps us recognize him. And that recognition is what gives him an electoral victory in the US. Yeah? When it comes down to it. Yeah? And they played the game really well of trying to damage some of the other distinctive assets on the other side. Yeah, they can be positive and negative. So that's the reality. Just so you ever get a sense, this is a little bit how we measure it. So the key difference, both with fame and fluency, is time pressure. If you put people under time pressure, you get more System1 responses. I can show you tons and tons of brand lists that we get all the time where you get completely the wrong answers by giving people far too long to answer your questions, far longer than actually they're ever going to spend. So if you want to pick a sad nerd like me, I can name 91 different car brands if you leave me alone for long enough. Yeah? I've worked in the car industry on the advertising side. I'm kind of a bit of a car dweeb. So the reality is you can just keep rolling out obscurer, weirder kind of car brands left to your own devices. But if you put me under time pressure and you have a big clock counting down and you give me, say, 10 seconds to answer, I'm much more likely to give you the 2, 3, 4, or 5 that I'm going to choose from when I buy my next car. And I think that's very relevant. It really makes a difference. We see it mattering all the time. So time pressure, time-pressured salience of some kind is really what you're trying to kind of find out. The same with feeling. Apologies for this slightly manky set of faces, but we've been using them now for comfortably in excess of 10 years. They've been shown to, I can't remember now, the last time we counted, I think it's something like 11 million people in 100 different countries, and it's all based on the work of Paul Ekman, works really well. We keep trying to beat it with the best facial recognition technology we find, and so far we don't think we come close. And that's the reality. We're just trying to ask people, how do you feel? These 7 basic emotions. For those of you who've read a lot of Paul Ekman, you'll realize we cheated and invented a new one called neutral. And weirdly, what we've uncovered that really helps us is you're trying to avoid neutral. Meh is not good in marketing. And there's a staggering quantity of it out there. There's a lot of meh. And you're really trying to stay away from it as much as you can. And then fluency, lots of different ways of doing it. But again, usually we're trying to show you things that are distinctive and then trying to see if you can recognize them and attribute them correctly. Also under time pressure. We've been doing this for quite a while. This is an attempt to correlate it, trying to explain the next movements in market shares. Is it going up? Is it coming down? By how much? And how well are they doing? And this is quite a good correlation, we feel now. So we're kind of quite comfortable that it starts to predict. And why does it predict? And I think it's really down to these 3 heuristics that are driving our choices. The first one is experience. Our own experience trumps everything else. So you can tell me that, I don't know, apologies if there's anyone Nigerian in the audience, you can tell me that Abuja is the coming destination, but I've been to Abuja, and I'm never going back. Unless it's for an obscene amount of money that would transform my life. It wasn't great. Now, that's the harsh truth of what happens. Our experience carries a far greater weight than anything else. So if your experience of the best restaurant in Quebec is that you went once and the wine waiter was a bit sniffy and you didn't have a great meal, it's a rubbish restaurant. It doesn't matter what 10,000 other people say. if your own personal experience says it's rubbish. And what's interesting about it is how sophisticated it can be. Why this is a picture of a boat. I went sailing with a friend of mine. I'm not a great sailor. I used to be crew because I was heavy for a guy who was a great sailor. And what was interesting to me was you go on a boat with him, and for me, it all sounds weird. The flapping of the sail, the wind in the rope, everything sounds weird. And for him, he would just sit there until he heard the one thing that made him worry, and then like something was going to happen. We were either going to capsize, or it was all about to go horribly wrong. And that's what you get through experience. You get that really learned System1 sense of what am I worried about. Yeah, and you get that in your jobs, in your industries all the time. When is the scandal coming, or what do you do when the scandal happens, or whatever those kind of things are? That's professional, learned, successful experience. Second one's emotion. We've already talked about this. How we feel really drives. And then the last one's pattern recognition. So much so, this is the weird thing where we see faces in everything, even when they're not faces. That's how good our pattern recognition system is. It's trying to find faces in everything. Yeah, in everything you look at. I'm indebted to Tumblr and memes and the internet. There are billions of these out there of people spotting faces where there aren't actual faces. Yeah, we're amazing. Yeah, so that's the reality of what's going on. So let's talk very quickly about telling stories. I recognize I started a bit late, but we're almost on time. Little bit about storytelling. This is a great book by a guy called Christopher Booker called 7 Basic Plots. And these are the 7 basic plots. And for those of you who don't like reading the kind of gubbins I put on slides, and you can have all these presentations afterwards, I picked movies that might remind you what those stories basically are. So apologies, all classification errors are mine, but it doesn't matter. So that's the context. We're based around universal stories, and we're trying to understand those stories. I actually think storytelling might be a really useful tool for what you do in marketing, because it is so visceral and happens over such a long time. There's a lot of talk in your industry about history and those kind of things. These are accretive stories that build up over kind of like time, and it's a bit like family stories. Yeah. So if you get my kids up here, they basically tell you, I only have 10 stories, and I repeat them ad nauseam. And once you've heard the 10, they don't really get any better. But the truth is, I've got more practice at telling them. Yeah, that's really how it kind of like works. This even works for brands. So most brands have a story. Apologies, I'll just explain the first one just because it's relevant. So the BBC, in the UK, it's our British Broadcasting Corporation. It's quite well known internationally. And we basically assume it's this kind of comedy thing on the edge of chaos every moment, that it's always going to be doing stupid things. But deep down, we love it. And we hope that it has a happy ending. We're desperate for it to have a kind of happy ending, even though we lambast it and take the Michael out of it at all times. Sorry, that's a polite way of trying to say make fun of it. So that's the reality. We try and write these stories for brands, try and test them, and then try and tell the best story that you have permission to tell. That's kind of what you're trying to do in the kind of context of industry. And I'll just give you a very quick example of Tesco. So the Tesco is a big British supermarket, probably a little bit of hubris. It decided to set off around the world. It was so successful in the UK, and it would teach everyone else how to do supermarket retailing. And it went off to Korea, and it went off to Thailand, and it went off to various countries in Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and decided, we're going to be wonderful. It even more embarrassment, went off to the US. So fresh and easy, that abject opportunity of taking £1 million and burning it in a large pile. That's basically what Tesco's did in the US. And that's the reality. You're trying to test the stories that work. Now, Tesco's have a bit of a scandal. So they had an accounting scandal where they were clearly cheating about how they added up their numbers. They had a whole series of setbacks in market share. It's kind of interesting trying to understand, so what happens next? And this was really what we tried to kind of like test for. So we took these stories, and then effectively you're saying, what proportion are saying that's a credible story? You're doing credible versus least credible, so they're picking between them. And then a little bit, how do you feel? What's the emotion you feel if that story came true? Yeah, it's just an interesting way of trying to parse the different stories apart and trying to see what the story was telling. And the reality is, as you can see, Tesco was the top story, but actually we felt there was a lot of potential in something like Rebirth. Yeah, maybe there's an opportunity for Tesco to do something kind of like new. And that was really where we tried to work on. So this was the current story. All the stuff in pink is just straight consumer verbatim. So we use a kind of open-ended text box kind of thing that's quite smart. And this is just, this isn't our words. This is us basically putting connectives between their words. And the same, the opportunity we felt was a better kind of rebirth story, and that was really the kind of context of the story. And it helps with lots of problems. I think one of the things we see all the time is any kind of crisis. Everyone's suddenly terrified whether their story has changed or not. And I think what you find with some of these is you either just have to be a little bit patient, or there's something you can do that would help make your story turn out not to be the drama, the problem that you think it is. Yeah, and I think what you probably know much better than I do, and I've seen lots of excellent studies on this, is if you're, I don't know, apologies for bringing these up, but if you're Tunisia and some madman has appeared on your beach and killed 38 tourists, I think 22 of whom were British, sorry guys, but some people are not going to come for a bit, and that's the nature of the beast. Yeah, there's not much you can do. No amount of advertising or encouragement or price reduction is really going to overcome some of those problems. Yeah, that's the reality of how it works. Yet weirdly, in some environments, you can overcome those things if your story, your narrative, is somehow stronger than that. Yeah. And I think to anyone who's involved in the tourism London or something, what London basically is hoping is, having had 20 years of relative stability where, frankly, we're more likely to get run over by a car or a bus. We've now had a couple of incidents in quick succession. And what we're hoping is that the pound is so weak that your desperation to come and buy something cheaply is going to overcome your concern that, terrorists are on the streets of London at all times. And I think that's the kind of narrative sometimes that you're trying to deal with in your industry. What are the choices you have in those kind of environments? Sometimes people don't notice it. I just wanted to talk a little bit also about advertising very quickly. Basically, it's about happiness. Yeah, I apologize for shamelessly. So that's me. I said I'd shut up. I'm going to go for a little bit longer. I apologize. I've still got another 5 minutes, so I'll keep going for another couple at least. But it's really about happiness. I probably won't go through this case study, but the IPA, if you've never come across it in the UK, have done a great case study looking at campaigns over time. And the truth is, emotional campaigns do better than rational or combined. Yeah? And they set out in this study to prove that what they thought would happen is a combination of rational and emotional messaging would work best, and they were slightly confused by their findings to discover that emotional seemed to do better than everything else. And the longer your campaign goes on, the more true this is. Yeah? What they also did, and this is the latest work from Les Binnett and Peter Field, was have a look at, everyone's very excited about digital. Email marketing makes us feel that some of these things are kind of free, free opportunities. If all I had was their email addresses, everything would be transformed and I could just spam them daily with thousands of messages and everyone would come. That's the reality. And what it really shows is that actually brand building takes time, but gets you on an escalator that, kind of moves up. Whereas what we see with a lot of digital campaigns is you get the short-term blip and then you go back to where you were, and short-term blip and back to where you were, and sometimes very hard to do the equation that shows that you're in any kind of like upward growth. Yeah, that's the reality. It's really funny, when I was trying to explain this to one of my children who showed a passing interest and then I captured them, they basically pointed out something I never thought of, which is I'm indebted to my wife. This is, my personal growth is her kind of mission. I'm on that kind of like upward escalator to try and kind of like improve me. And left to my own devices, I was the sad sack who was going out trying to find someone who liked me enough to go to bed with me, and then kind of, going to this very sad lifestyle on my own. And I suspect that's a framing task I'm just trying to kind of put up. I think all of your brands, all of your markets, there's a kind of upward story you're trying to tell, and that takes time and effort to create, and I'm not sure that what we see from a lot of digital campaigns is that can do it on its own. So, quickly go through happiness. This was a John Lewis case study that is a big UK retailer that I won't tell you about, but it was really, the only bit that was relevant was this. You always want to show, oh, we made a model, and our model almost turned out to be like real life. And that's because this is over about 6 years, so we're kind of quite proud of it. But, I mean, the sad reality is that's all I was trying to do, so you've seen it now. What also matters in stories, and I'm just going to show you one more ad, 2 more ads, actually.
dedication, loyalty,
Next week, buddy.
friendship. The choices we make reveal the true nature of our character.
And what was most interesting about this story for us was two things. One, this took quite a long time. So this was us working with a client. They made 7 scripts. We made 4 animatics. We recommended that they went with this one. We actually tested the film 3 times, once when they first made it, once when we'd had a big debate, desperately trying to get them to remove as much of the long, turgid, and quite tedious voiceover that they were desperate to have and replace it with just that little bit at the end. And then once at the end, when just before they kind of like aired it. But I think the story, you know, this is a 30-second story. And that's the reality of what you're trying to deal with. Actually, it's almost 60-second story. I apologize, but that's what you're trying to deal with. This is storytelling at its best, and it's iterated and improved by the people who worked on it. And it's been very successful for Guinness. They've sold a ton of Guinness as a result. We tried to make a library, so we've been around the world testing tons of ads for the last few years. This was, if you've never seen it, a brilliant ad for toilet paper in France that was very successful. And it's all on a website if you want to go and have a look, the Feel More 50. We test ads around the world. So what we've really learned, this is the conclusion bit. I'll try and do this as quickly as I can. One, the classical marketing model seems to get you short-term effects but little else. That's what we tend to find. That's what we're finding our clients frustrated about, and that's what we're trying to work out how to help them solve. The honest truth, we make a whole stack of mistakes, just like everyone else. We're just trying to not make the same mistake repeatedly, because that would be foolish. In terms of some basic things really matter in your industry, and I think these are so fundamental you can't get away from some of them. It's still about penetration and frequency, you know, how many people, how often, it's raw, and it really doesn't matter about the price level. We keep meeting people who go, oh, we're only interested in this tiny elite of people who spend all this huge, mega kind of like bucks. I think if you're tiny and no one can come, then doing something to make maximum value out of your scarcity, okay, that I understand. But the truth for everyone else is you're trying to get as many people as often as you can. That's the math. Yeah, that's what you're trying to do. The second bit that I think completely is underestimated, I play a game sometimes. I was speaking at a business school trying to ask people which industry had the lowest inflation I could identify over 60 years, and it's travel. Yeah, a flight to you know, the Philippines in 1967 probably didn't cost that much more in actual dollars. Forget the intervention of inflation now than it did then. Yeah, I mean, that's the reality. It's ridiculous. We got some of these things where it's so cheap. It's amazing. Accessibility. I think you are valiantly. I did some work with the World Trade and Travel Council, Trade and Tourism Council, a guy called David Scalzo, who I once worked with many moons ago when he was at Hilton, and we were trying to do some stuff with them. All of the hassle stuff really matters. You guys have got to keep fighting to keep borders open, making it not too hard. You know, I know that there are lots of politicians who think they know what they're doing, but I know that you have the stats that tell them they wouldn't know their arse from their elbow and couldn't find it with a map. And I think you need to keep the pride and the truth that you have in trying to say that if you want to have a tourism industry, you've got to try and make some of these things as easy as possible. Fun, fast, and easy is what makes it solvable. And making it epic and hard is fine if you only want 5 people to come. But if you want 5 million, 50 million, 500 million, then make it fun, fast, and easy. And then the last one, safety and security. People's perceptions about safety and security are very weird. They bear almost no relation to fact. We sometimes have a game we also play about, you know, how many people each year are killed by deer, how many people by swimming pools, how many people by guns, and how many people by sharks. And it's slightly depressing that if you put people down and get them to think about it for a bit, they pretty much can get most of those things in the right order. But if you ask them spontaneously and you put them under time pressure, they rarely get them right. You say, what are you most scared of or something? Then I'm afraid, you know, sharks that kill less people each year than toasters are demonized in a way that you can't kind of get away from. Yeah, that's the reality. Okay, and then the most basic and predictive things still, I would feel, are true in your industry as we've seen in every other. It's about fame, it's about feeling, it's about fluency, it's about your story and how you're using it to make it better. And that's very true in destination marketing, whether you're Quebec City or Quezon City. Everyone wants shortcuts, and I wish I was sitting up here with some fantastic snake oil that said, if only you do this, all of your problems will miraculously be solved. And the harsh reality is most of the good things you see, we discount all the work that's gone into them by the moment we see them and think they got it there easy. And it would appear that that's not true. So I'm going to leave you on a high. Let's watch with this. Now, the harsh truth, I don't know how many of you have horse boxes or even know anything about horses, but I show this ad as a man who sometimes gets out and lets my wife park the car. I have no shame. She's just really good at it. But the truth is, they just wanted to make you feel something, and that's all I did. So thank you very much.